The air in the town always changed when people talked about the dog. He wasn't anyone's pet. He was more like a piece of the old junkyard at the edge of the neighborhood, a moving shadow among the piles of scrap metal and forgotten cars. The junkyard was a kingdom of silence, broken only by the wind whistling through holes in rusty fenders. And he was its king, a lonely, watchful king. People had tried to help at first. The man who ran the junkyard, a kind fellow with grease under his fingernails, would leave out big bowls of kibble and fresh water near the gate every evening. In the morning, the food would be gone, but you'd never see the dog eat it. He waited for the deep, quiet dark. The local animal control officer, a woman with a big heart and a gentle voice, had set out the most tempting traps with the best sausages. The dog would circle them, his nose working the air, but he never went in. He was too clever, too full of a deep fear people couldn't understand. He was a big dog, maybe part German shepherd, but it was hard to tell under all the matted, dirty fur. You could see the shape of his ribs pressing against his skin when he moved. His eyes were the color of old amber, and they held a story no one could read. They weren't mean eyes, not exactly. They were tired. They were eyes that had seen enough of people and decided to be done with them. The kids on their bikes gave the junkyard fence a wide berth, pedaling faster when they passed it. They'd heard stories. Parents pointed him out as a warning. See that dog? You stay away. You don't go near an animal like that. So the dog became a lesson, a ghost story. They called him Ghost, or sometimes Shadow. The name stuck because he seemed less like a real animal and more like a spirit of the place. But if you watched very, very carefully, sometimes you could see him. In the late afternoon, when the sun was low and threw long, deep shadows from the towers of scrap, he would appear. He'd climb to the highest point he could find, which was usually the cab of an old, crushed garbage truck. He would sit there, perfectly still, facing the neighborhood. He wasn't growling. He wasn't threatening. He was just watching. Watching the houses where lights flicked on one by one. Watching people come home and call their children inside. Watching other dogs, on leashes or in fenced yards, play with their families. He just watched it all. A silent observer from a kingdom of rust. Winter was starting to whisper in the wind. The mornings had a sharp bite to them, and the grass was often stiff with frost. The kind man at the junkyard started leaving an old horse blanket near the food, hoping the dog would use it for warmth. The animal control officer's calls became more urgent. "We can't get near him," she'd say, her voice tight with worry. "A hard freeze is coming. If he won't let us help him, he won't make it." The town's worry for the rogue dog began to harden into a sad acceptance. Some stories, they thought, just don't have a happy ending. The dog on the hill seemed to agree. His watchful silence felt more and more like a goodbye, but stories can change when you aren't looking. They can change because of something small and quiet. In the house whose backyard touched the junkyard fence, a change had already arrived. A family had moved in. And in that family was a little girl. She was small for her age, with a quiet way about her. She liked to draw more than she liked to cook. Her world was on paper, filled with princesses and dragons and kind-eyed animals. Her bedroom window faced the junkyard, and one gray afternoon she saw him. The dog was just a dark shape moving between two piles of metal. But he moved with such a heavy sadness, it caught her eye. She didn't see a scary monster. She didn't see a rogue. She just saw a dog that looked very, very lonely. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't run outside. She just found a new subject for her drawings. She sat at her small desk and started to sketch the big, sad dog on the hill. She gave him a proud head and intelligent eyes in her picture. She didn't know his real story. So in her drawing, she gave him one. She decided he was a knight, a noble guardian who who was just very, very tired from his long watch. He wasn't waiting to be saved. He was just waiting for someone to understand. And without even knowing it, she had already begun. The little girl didn't make a plan. She didn't ask her parents if she could befriend the wild dog in the junkyard. She simply started spending more time in the backyard. Her mother was happy to see her playing outside, getting some fresh air, instead of being curled up with her sketchbook all the time. But she wasn't exactly playing. She found a good spot, an old smooth tree stump that had been left near the back fence. From there, she had a clear view into the junkyard. The first few days, she just sat. She'd bring a book with her or her drawings, and she'd hum softly to herself. She was very aware of the fence, a chain-link wall woven with vines that separated her safe, green world from his world of gray metal and dust. She had seen how the adults approached him. They came with a purpose. The animal control officer with her traps, moving slowly, but with a clear goal. The junkyard man with his food, putting the bowl down with a hopeful clatter. They all wanted something from the dog. To catch him, to save him, to fix him. The dog understood that language of intention, and he wanted no part of it. So the girl did the opposite. She had no intention, at least not one she could explain. She just wanted to be there. She decided she wouldn't even look at him directly. She remembered reading in one of her animal books that direct eye contact could be scary for a nervous creature. So she would sit sideways on the stump, her legs swinging, and she'd look at her book, or at the clouds, or at her own hands. High up on his perch, the dog watched. This new small human was a puzzle. She didn't carry food. She didn't have ropes or metal boxes. She didn't stare at him with those worried, determined eyes the others had. She just existed. She was like a quiet little bird that had landed in his territory, and she didn't seem to know or care that he was a predator. On the third day, she started to read aloud. Her voice was thin and clear in the open air. She was reading a story about a rabbit who went on an adventure. She stumbled over the bigger words, but she kept going. She wasn't reading for him. She was just practicing. But her voice carried. The dog's ears, which were usually flattened back or swiveling nervously, pricked up. The sound was strange. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a cooing baby talk sound people sometimes used. It was just a voice, telling a story about carrots and safe burrows. A week passed. The routine was set. After school, the girl would go to her stump. Sometimes she'd draw, her pencil scratching softly on the paper. Sometimes she'd read. She started talking a little bit too. Not to the dog, but just to the air. "That cloud looks like a grumpy old man," she'd say. Or, "I didn't like the carrots at lunch today." The dog began to change his own routine. Instead of staying hidden until absolute dark, he started appearing earlier, while the afternoon sun was still warm. He'd come down from his high tower and find a spot about 50 feet from the fence. He'd lie down in a patch of dusty sunlight, his head on his paws, facing a general direction. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, watching the little humming, reading, talking creature on the other side of the chain-link dot. It was a silent agreement. She pretended he wasn't there. He pretended she wasn't there. But they were both acutely aware of each other's presence. The space between them was filled with a new kind of quiet, not the empty silence of the junkyard, but a comfortable, shared silence. The girl's father noticed. He'd peek out the kitchen window and see his daughter on the stump, and the large, dirty shape of the dog lying in the distance. His heart would clutch with fear at first. He started to open the back door to call her in, but something made him pause. He saw the way his daughter sat, completely relaxed, absorbed in her book. He saw the way the dog lay, not tense and ready to flee, but almost resting. It was the most still he'd ever seen the animal. He called his wife over. "Look at this," he whispered. They watched together from the window, unseen. "She's been doing this for 2 weeks," he said. "And look at him. He's not running." The mother felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. "It's not safe. He's a wild animal. What if he jumps the fence?" But the father, a patient man who worked with his hands, saw things differently. "He's had 100 chances to jump that fence if he wanted to cause trouble. He hasn't. Look at his face." They squinted. From this distance, they couldn't see the dog's eyes, but they could see the direction of his snout. It was pointed right toward their daughter. Not in an aggressive way, but in a curious, steady way. That evening at dinner, the father asked his daughter casually, "So? I see you have a new friend out back by the junkyard." The girl looked up, her eyes wide. She didn't know she'd been seen. She nodded slowly. "He's not a friend yet," she said carefully, as if correcting a very important fact. "He's just there, and I'm just here. We're both just being here." Her parents exchanged a look over the table. It was such a simple, profound statement. We're both just being here. The mother's fear didn't vanish, but it was mixed now with a dawning sense of wonder. Her quiet daughter, who often seemed lost in her own world, had somehow found a way to speak a language that the most fearful creature in the neighborhood could understand. It wasn't the language of words or actions. It was the language of quiet, patient presence. And as the days grew shorter and colder, that quiet presence was building a bridge, inch by invisible inch, across the dusty no-man's land of the junkyard and over the cold, hard links of the fence. The turning point, as many are, came from a small and ordinary thing, a sandwich. The little girl was eating her lunch on the stump, a peanut butter sandwich on soft white bread. She was halfway through it when she saw him. He was closer today, maybe only 30 feet from the fence, lying in the thin shadow of a stripped car chassis. She could see the details better, now the way his fur was clumped, the alert set of his ears, even as he rested. A thought occurred to her, a thought so simple it felt obvious. The adults left him big bowls of professional-looking kibble. But what if he was hungry for something else? What if he was tired of food that smelled like charity and traps? She looked down at her sandwich. Peanut butter was her favorite. Maybe it could be his favorite, too. Slowly, very slowly, she tore the uneaten half of her sandwich into 2 pieces. She stood up from the stump, her movements smooth and unthreatening. She didn't walk straight toward the fence. She walked at an angle, toward a spot a few feet to the left of where he lay. He was instantly on his feet, body tense, ready to melt back into the maze of metal. But he didn't run. He watched her, a low tremor in his legs. She stopped a full 10 steps from the chain link. Then she bent down, placed 1 piece of the sandwich on the grass on her side of the fence, and carefully set the other piece on a flat, rusty hubcap that was just on the other side, poking through a gap near the bottom. It was an offering, but also an invitation. Piece for her side, a piece for his. She didn't wait. She didn't watch to see what he would do. She turned and walked back to her stump, her back to him, and picked up her book. Her heart was thumping so loudly in her ears, she was sure he could hear it. She pretended to read, the words just a blur on the page. For 5 long minutes, nothing happened. The only sound was the distant bark of a neighbor's dog and the rustle of dry leaves. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow move. He approached the fence not in a straight line, but in a slow, wary arc. He stopped, sniffing the air deeply. His eyes flicked from the sandwich piece on the hubcap to her small, rigid back dot in one swift, silent motion. He stretched his neck through the gap, snatched the bread and peanut butter, and was gone. The girl let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She didn't feel disappointment that he ran. She felt a surge of pure joy. He had taken it. He had accepted something from her world. The next day, she did it again. This time, she brought a whole new sandwich, just for him. She went through the same ritual, placing one half on her side, one half on the hubcap. She sat on the stump and started to hum a song they were learning at school, a simple, repetitive tune about friendship. This time, he didn't wait 5 minutes. He emerged from behind a stack of tires almost as soon as she sat down. He still moved with caution, but the frantic edge was gone. He ate the piece on the hubcap, then, to her astonishment, he looked at the piece on her side of the fence. He looked at it, then he looked directly at her. It wasn't a scary look. It was a questioning look. His head tilted just a little. Holding her breath, she gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. He moved along the fence line until he was opposite the bread on the grass. He pressed his nose against the cold metal, sniffing. He couldn't reach it. He looked at her again, a soft whine escaping his throat. It was the first sound she had ever heard him make. Slowly, she stood. She walked toward the fence, toward the bread. He didn't retreat. He watched her every move. She knelt in the grass, picked up the piece of sandwich, and gently pushed it through one of the small diamond-shaped holes in the chain-link. He was so close. She could smell him, a dusty, earthy smell, not unpleasant, like old leaves and sun-warmed metal. His nose, black and leathery, twitched. Then, with an incredible gentleness, he took the bread from her fingertips. His teeth never touched her skin. He stood there, chewing, looking at her from a distance of less than 2 feet. His eyes, that old amber color, held hers. The fear in them was still there, but it was sharing space with something new. Something like confusion. Something like a fragile, dawning hope. He didn't run away that day. After he finished eating, he simply lay down right there, on his side of the fence, parallel to her. She sat down in the grass on her side, her knees pulled to her chest. They stayed that way until her mother called her in for dinner, a silent companionship now held together by the taste of peanut butter and the memory of a gentle take. That night, the girl told her parents everything. She told them about the sandwich, about the hubcap, about the wine and the look in his eyes. Her father listened, his face serious. "So he took food right from your hand?" he asked. "Through the fence," she clarified. He was very polite. Her parents had a long, quiet conversation after she went to bed. The mother was still afraid, but the father was convinced. "She's not trying to catch him," he said. "She's not forcing anything. She's just building a door, and he's starting to walk up to it." They decided on a new plan. No more traps. No more sudden movements. They would help their daughter help him, but on his terms. The father bought a small bag of high-quality dog food and some soft, chewy treats. He gave them to his daughter. "You're in charge of this," he said. "You know the rhythm. We'll follow your lead." The trust was no longer just between the girl and the dog. It was spreading, a quiet vine of understanding growing in the most unlikely soil. And the next step on that fragile bridge was about to be taken, not with food, but with a story. The rhythm of their afternoons changed. It was no longer just about the girl visiting the stump. It was an appointment, quietly understood by both. The dog, who the neighborhood still called Ghost, but the girl now secretly thought of as her knight, began waiting for her. He'd be there in his spot by the fence, often already lying down, his chin on his paws. As she came out the back door with her small bag of supplies, the supplies were simple. A few treats, a book, and sometimes a blanket for herself when the autumn air grew chilly. She had stopped putting the food on the hubcap. Now she would simply sit down, cross-legged in the grass right up against the chain-link fence. She'd lay a few pieces of dog food or a soft treat on the ground between them, pushing half through to his side. He would eat his share slowly, then settle, watching as she read. She had moved on from picture books. She'd found an old storybook at the library, a thick one with chapters, about a great wolf who was the guardian of a mystical forest. She thought he might like it, so she began to read it aloud. Her voice was steady now, not nervous. She read about deep, shadowy woods and clearings filled with moonlight. She read about the wolf's silent patrols, his loneliness, and his fierce protection of the creatures who could not protect themselves. She didn't know if the dog understood the words, but he certainly understood the tone, the cadence of her voice rising and falling, the gentle rhythm of the story. One afternoon, something new happened. She was reading a particularly calm passage, describing the wolf resting by a still pond. She had her back leaning lightly against the fence, the book propped on her knees. She felt a small shift behind her. Then a gentle, solid pressure against her spine, right through the metal links. She froze, her voice trailing off. The pressure was warm. It was the dog. He had shifted his big body and was now lying with his back against the fence, mirroring her position. Only the thin, cold barrier of the chain link separated them. She could feel the faint vibration of his breathing, the solidness of him. He had chosen to make contact. Tears sprang to her eyes, but she didn't move. She didn't turn around. She swallowed the lump in her throat and found her place on the page again. Her voice was a little shakier as she started reading once more. And the wolf knew, in the quiet of the night, that he was no longer alone in his watch. This became their new ritual. She would arrive, share the food, and then sit with her back to the fence. Within minutes, she would feel the comforting weight and warmth of him pressing back. They were two bookends, holding up the silence between them. She read stories of adventure, of friendship, of home. And he listened, his eyes often closed, his body finally relaxed in a way it had never been in his lonely kingdom of scrap. The girl's father witnessed this one day. He had come out to bring her a jacket and stopped in his tracks, the screen door closing softly behind him. There was his daughter, reading aloud. And there was the massive, once terrifying dog, lying not 2 inches away from her through the fence, his back pressed to hers, sound asleep. Not just resting, but deeply asleep, one paw twitching slightly as he dreamed. The sight was so peaceful, so profoundly trusting, that it brought a tightness to the man's own throat. This was no longer a rescue operation. It was a friendship. He knew what had to be done. The dog couldn't stay in the junkyard through winter. The trust was there, but the fence was still a prison. He made a call, not to the general animal control, but to a woman he'd heard about who specialized in difficult cases, a trainer who worked with fearful dogs. He explained the situation, the weeks of patient work, the incredible bond his daughter had formed. "We don't want to scare him," he said. "We need to help him choose to come in." The specialist came to see for herself. She parked down the street and watched from a distance with binoculars. She saw the girl arrive, saw the dog's tail give the faintest hint of a wag, a movement so slight most would miss it. She saw the shared meal, the gentle press against the fence, the reading. When she came to talk to the parents, her face was full of wonder. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "He's not just tolerating her. He's bonded. She's his safe place. We can use that." Together, they formed a gentle plan. They would set up a large, comfortable crate in the family's garage, with the door wide open. They would make a trail of the dog's favorite treats from the junkyard. Through a special gate the junkyard owner agreed to leave open, right into the crate. The girl would be the key. She would sit calmly by the crate, reading her book. The hope was that he would follow the trail of trust, literally and figuratively, to be with her. The day they tried it, the air was cold and smelled of coming snow. The girl was nervous, but determined. She sat on a little stool in the dim garage, the big crate behind her with a soft bed inside. The garage door was open just a sliver. She opened her book and began to read, her voice carrying out into the quiet yard. Inside the junkyard, the dog followed the trail of treats, eating them as he went. He paused at the new opening in the fence, his nose working. He could smell the girl. He could hear her voice, a familiar and safe anchor in all this strange newness. He hesitated for a long time, standing in the open gateway, looking between the freedom of his old, harsh home and the path that led to her voice. Then he took a step forward, and then another. He moved slowly, cautiously through the yard, toward the dark slash of the garage door. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw her there, reading. He saw the crate behind her. He whined softly. The girl didn't jump up. She didn't call his name. She simply looked up, met his eyes, and gave a small, warm smile. Then she patted the floor beside her gently and went back to reading, her voice steady and calm. That was all the invitation he needed. He padded into the garage, walked straight past the open crate, and lay down on the concrete floor right next to her stool. He rested his head heavily on his paws, let out a deep sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of his soul, and closed his eyes. He was safe. He was home. The fence, at long last, was gone. The first night in the garage was a vigil of gentle sounds. The dog, exhausted from the monumental courage of his journey, slept deeply on the old blankets they'd spread for him. But every so often he would startle awake, a soft whimper escaping his throat as he looked around the unfamiliar walls. Each time, from a cot set up nearby, the girl would whisper, "It's okay. You're safe." Just the sound of her voice was enough. His ears would twitch, he'd sigh, and drift back to sleep. Her parents took turns staying up, watching this quiet dialogue, their own fear finally melting away into awe. The real work began the next morning. It wasn't about training a wild animal. It was about welcoming a very frightened guest into their world. The specialist had warned them. The house, with its loud appliances and narrow doorways, would be terrifying. So they moved one step at a time. The girl was the bridge for everything. The first time the dog needed to go outside, he balked at the garage door leading to the backyard. He stood frozen, trembling. The girl walked out first, sat on the grass, and called him back to their familiar spot. He crept out, staying close to her side, his body low to the ground. The wide-open sky seemed to scare him more than the junkyard ever had. But she was there, a calm anchor in the middle of the vast, frightening lawn. A visit from a gentle, soft-spoken veterinarian was the next hurdle. The dog hid behind the girl, pressing his head into her lap. The vet understood. He did the examination right there on the garage floor, speaking in low tones, letting the dog sniff every instrument. With the girl's hand on his neck, the dog allowed the pokes and prods, the shots, the careful clipping of his matted fur. He was given a clean bill of health, just skinny and worn out from a life of fear. They found no microchip, no old collar marks. He was a blank page. Through it all, the dog's eyes were fixed on the girl. He watched her to understand what was safe. If she was relaxed, he could try to relax. If she offered a new kind of food, a piece of chicken from her dinner, he would take it, learning that not all new things were bad. He followed her from room to room in the house when he finally felt brave enough to enter, his nails clicking nervously on the hardwood floors. He would lie at her feet while she did her homework, his head resting on her shoe. The transformation wasn't just in the dog. The girl blossomed. Her quiet confidence, once reserved for her sketchbook, now filled the house. She was the translator, the guide. Her parents watched her explain to the dog that the vacuum cleaner was loud, but not dangerous, that the doorbell was just a sound, that car rides could lead to fun places like the park. She had a patience far beyond her years, a deep well of understanding she had poured into this one lost creature. Choosing a name felt like a final, important ceremony. The old name's ghost, shadow belonged to the past, to the animal he was when he was alone. The family sat together, throwing out ideas. The girl listened, but she already knew. She had known since she'd drawn him as a knight on a hill. Samson, she said softly, testing the word. Her father smiled. Like the strong man from the stories? She shook her head, looking at the dog, who was now peacefully chewing a new toy by the fireplace. Not because he's strong on the outside, but because he found his real strength. It was inside him all along. He just needed a friend to help him find it. Samson. The name fit him. It held dignity. It held a history of overcoming. Weeks turned into months. Samson filled out, his coat becoming soft and shiny. He learned the joy of a squeaky toy, the comfort of a dog bed by the fire, the routine of meals and walks. But his deepest happiness was always with the girl. He was her shadow, her protector, her most devoted listener. One evening, the girl was sick with a bad cold, tucked under a mountain of blankets and pillows on the living room couch. She was dozing fitfully. Her parents were moving around the kitchen, making soup. Samson, who usually followed every step they took, did not move from his post. He was lying on the floor beside the couch, his chin on the cushions, watching her sleep. Every cough from the girl made his eyebrows twitch with concern. She woke up, feeling miserable and hot. She opened her eyes to see his worried face inches from hers. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing the fur between his ears. Without a sound, he stood up, turned in a careful circle, and then, ever so gently, laid his full weight alongside the couch, his big body pressed against it. Then he carefully rested his heavy head right on her chest, over her heart, and let out a long, warm huff of breath. Thought it was the ultimate act of trust and love. He was giving her his weight, his warmth, his presence as medicine. He was guarding her rest. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck, buried her face in his fur, and finally slept a deep, peaceful sleep. Her parents found them like that an hour later, intertwined, both breathing softly in unison. They didn't say a word. They just looked at each other, their eyes saying everything. The rogue dog who had rejected all people had not just accepted one. He had chosen a family. He had traded a kingdom of rust and loneliness for a kingdom of quiet moments, shared sandwiches, and a little girl's whispered stories. He was no longer a ghost of the junkyard. He was Samson, and he was home.